Hello, this is Marriott. This is the Aubrey Light. I give a conservative take about the world around me. Alright, so feedback is greatly important. Feel free to reach out to me either through email, Substack, and all of those links will be provided for you along with my Shopify link. Alright, so some of the audio platforms that I'm on Spreaker, Spotify, Amazon Music, Pandora, iHeartRadio, just to name a few. Alright, so this episode is about surrealism. Let's go. Alright, so I'm going to jump into my thoughts about surrealism. Surrealism is one of those things where you mix. I interpret it as this aspect from this point of view is if you're escaping into a dream and it's doing its best to expel the experiences one would have in a dream. And also, it goes along the aspects of, Sigmund Freud, which this man was a wackadoodle in itself, and his stuff was highly discredited because, it was... Anyway, but the contributions, I guess, that people have put about Sigmund Freud in mainstream media and especially in pop culture, that's something to expel on in the aspects of how these paintings look, because Sigmund Freud was one of those psychiatrists that said that there's a lot of repressed things that happen when people are dreaming, and that's just a manifestation of everything. And I think that surrealists were doing their best to capture that, like a glimpse of that, of what that could be, from the mental to the visual feeling of the emotional impact that it has when you have this dream that seems so real that it is, in fact, you feel disillusioned. I mean, some people might feel disillusioned. It depends on that interpretation, that it wasn't real. And it's something to that. All right, so with all this said, with what I just said, I'm going to get into more facts about surrealism. Here we go. All right, so, and of course, the source will be, sources will be provided for you in this episode. So, surrealism is an art and cultural movement that developed in Europe in the aftermath of World War I, aiming to allow unconscious minds to express itself, often resulting in the depiction of illogical or dreamlike scenes and ideas. It was officially established in Paris in the year of 1924. So with the publication of André Breton's Surrealist Manifesto, The movement drew heavily on theories adapted, as I was saying, from Sigmund Freud, focusing on exploring the subconscious through various techniques, such as automatic drawing and the aspects of the body. So surrealism has no unified style but can be distinguished between two extremes in painting. At one pole, the viewer is confronted by a world that is completely defined and minutely depicted but makes no rational sense, as is seen in the works of Rene Magritte and Salvador Dali. At the other pole, the viewer is confronted with abstract biometric images that are suggestive but indefinitive, as seen in the works of Jean Art, Max Ernst, and John Miro. The movement's major figures include Breton, Carrington, Dali, Ernest, Finney, Magritte, and others. Surrealist influence spread throughout the globe, impacting visual arts, literature, theater, film, music, comedy, and other media, as well as political thought and practice, philosophical and social and cultural theories. Alright, so Surrealist emphasizes on positive expressions in contrast to the Dada movement, in which these were critiques of society and under restraint attacks on formal artistic convictions. However, it did adopt Dada's preoccupation with the bizarre, irrational, and fantastical aspects of, how everything was presented, as well as its reliance on accident and chance. So, automatic drawing, what is that? This is a spontaneous and uncensored recording of chaos image that erupt into the unconscious of the artist. So exquisite corpse, as it says. So this is a collaborative drawing approach where artists draw part of the human body, fold in the paper, and is passed to the next artist to add the next part, creating a collective composition. Diloclamanica. This is a technique where a sheet of paper is expressed into a painted surface and peeled off again. This was used by Ernest starting in 1937. And Gritade, I believe, is a surrealist painting technique that involves laying a canvas over textured objects and scraping the paint off to create an interesting and unexpected surface. Also, this technique was used by Ernest, which started in 37. So surrealists have a lasting impact on various forms of art and literature and influence the aspects of postmodernism fiction. For instance, writers like Thomas Pynchon and Paul Asher. Alright, so my thoughts about all of this here. So, okay. Especially with Salvador Dali and everything with that movement of, making the comment on the structure of society. And then it's quite interesting. Salvador Dali was one of the forerunners of that, doing art house film stuff, which that's not for everybody. Some of stuff from our house, considered, some stuff considered to be our house, some of it is bearable, but most of it is really overblown because, I don't know, it's one of those things. I equate it to this: art for the sake of art, or weird for the sake of weird. It doesn't really. It's a whole. What it equates to. It's not really getting to the heart of the matter, I think, in a genuine way. So why am I saying this? For instance, Salvador Dali, he did this one film where, he's supposed to do about the mores and the social reality of class systems, and the brutality of it, and showing the violence and within that. But he's depicting it in a way to where, it's over the top and very, well, it's just not, it's just too, it's not, it's one of those, I equate it to, seeing a film that lectures you. You don't want to see a film that, well, most people don't want to see films like that. They want to see films where it's relatable, they can understand. But if they want to see films where they want to learn something and expose, or it is an expose about society at large, have it digestible. That's my whole point behind it. And surrealism, again, there are depictions that really get into the grasp of the aspects of what that state of mind that people have when they are dreaming, and when they come out of that state, recalling a dream and having that cerebral impact on what that feels like on their mind, and interpreting that into a painting is quite interesting. And that's something to expel into the aspects of why this was really popular, and it's still popular, even more so in its time. All right, so I'm going to get into some more facts. Here we go. Okay, here we go. So, surrealist artists. With its emphasis on context and free form, surrealists provide a major alternative to the contemporary, so highly formalistic cubist movement, and a widely response for pre aspects of transforming into modernism and the traditional emphasis on content. So the work of major surrealist paintings is too diverse to be summarized categorically. Each artist sought his or her own means of self-expression. So some single-minded pursuit at a spontaneous revelation of the unconscious, free from controls of consciousness. While in mind, keep in mind that others, notably paint the Catalan painter Joan Miró, thought he never would officially join the group. So he used surrealism as a liberating starting point for an exploration of personal fantasies, conscious or unconscious, often throughout formal means of great beauty. So a range of possibilities falling between the two extremes can be distinguished. At one pole, which exemplifies its purists by works of French artists like Jean Arc, so the viewer is confronted with images, usually biomorphic, that are suggestive but indefinitive. As the viewer's mind works from the provocative image, unconscious associations are liberated, and the creative imagination asserts itself into a totally open-ended investigation process. So, to a greater or lesser extent, the German artist Max Ernst, French painter Andrew Masson, and Monroe also formed this approach. So, variously called organic, embolic, or absolute surrealism. At the other pole of the viewer is confronted by a world that is completely defined and minutely depicted, but that makes no rational sense. So, fully recognizable realistic painted images are removed from their normal context and resembled within. An ambiguous paradox or shocking framework. So, the aim is to provoke a sympathetic response, forcing the viewer to acknowledge the inherent sense of the irrational and logical essence. So, the most direct form of this approach was taken by Belgian artist René Magritte in simple but powerful paintings such as a portraying of a normal table setting that includes a plate holding a slice of ham, from the center of which stares a human eye. So Spanish artist Salvador Dali, French painter Pierre Roy, and Belgian artist Paul Devault rendered similar but more complex alien worlds that resemble compelling dreamlike scenes. Alright, so my thoughts here about what I just read and everything. So, I think that the best way I can interpret this from, it's, again, like I was saying, it escapes into a dreamlike state. But the way that it is depicted is almost into the state of how that merges together with fear, the conscious of fear, and interacting with it. Now, what am I exactly saying? So I think that horror films and literature that delves into something that's suspenseful, that suspends the mind, they really get that right. It really gets that right. And the most prevalent point, I think, is scary tales. Now, this book is elementary, but it was my first introduction, as really to see something that is depicted, that depicts fear in a way to where you can not only see it, but it draws and pulls you in to where it can be frightening, to where, especially for a kid, to where it suspends your conscious to want to understand and interpret what this book is all about, and especially capturing the aspects of when you go and look and see things in a dreamlike state, and it's of the unknown, and then you delving into something that is uncomfortable, that is fearful, and what to do about that, and how the impact of illustration can bring the attention to the viewer about the subject matter. And the Scary Tales, it did that really well, and it does that really well, because when you flip through the book and you see all these images, these well crafted illustrations and the attention to detail, it really tells the story without even reading the words, with just the image. And to be able to have that sort of depiction in a children's book, or it's supposed to be like a young preteen book, sort of, that's really something to say about that. Now imagine that on the aspects going back and pulling into the realm of adults depicting the surrealist state of matter, or the surrealist state of being, that trying to capture that, what that might be like when the conscious and the unconscious merge together. Alright, so with this said, I'm going to wrap up and give some more insight about surrealist art. Alright, so here we go. This is entitled 5 Things You Didn't Know About Surrealism. So it was a transitional movement. Throughout the work of many interested individuals and groups, surrealists found homes in many places. It went beyond natural boundaries and its scopes and impacts, and its seen or in our surrealist beyond borders, which the exhibition as a transcendental movement. So major artists from around the world were inspired by and united by surrealism. So for Buenos Aires, Cairo, Lisbon, Mexico City, Prague, Seoul, and Tokyo. They're all different. They used their interpretation of surrealism and also took root at different points in history. So from the 20s to the 70s. From surrealists from Belgrade work in the 20s, Shanghai in the 30s, Santiago de Chile in the 40s, and Chicago in the 70s. So surrealism was a community. What made surrealism a movement, was the sense of the supportive community between like-minded artists and writers. They were united by certain shared ideas, making collective works, publishing manifestos and journals. They created a friendship as well as their political and moral beliefs. So manifestos in particular were used to make public statements and often signified by those from many different locations. For example, an anti-colonial text of 1932 included contributions from Paris to Mantegue, while the Arab Surrealist Manifesto was published by Chicago Surrealists in 1975 to be exact. So surrealism stood for freedom. The surrealist movement was sparked from a revolutionary idea in Paris around 1924. And while it was generated many familiar works from Salvador Dali's Lobster Telephone to Rene Magritte's Time Transfixed, it has also been used by artists around the world as a serious weapon in struggle for political, social, and personal freedom. And from student civil rights and anti-war protests to the colonization movement, surrealists have served as the viable tool. So the movement found a place in political protests against colonialism, racism, Stalinism, and Nazism, and the Vietnam War, for example. So first president of Senegal and co-founder of Black Consciousness Movement, and this was explained in 1960. So this is a quote of it. So we accept surrealism as a means, but not as an end, as an ally, not as a master. So that's quite interesting with the aspects of Stalinism and, political protests against Stalinism and Nazism and all of this, because these were prevalent changes that were going on when these paintings, when this movement was happening, because it's towards the end of World War I, and we get into World War II, where Mussolini was in power, gaining more power, around after World War I, and then we get into the 30s and 40s when Stalin and then we get into the impact of Hitler and how that all drove together and intertwined into the depravity of the downfall of what the socialism and the socialist conscious mentality of being, believing that something is of the up being to purify a colonization, to where that by any tactics, that it doesn't matter, you gotta just annihilate what is considered impure. And the aspects of having an art movement to bring light to that and upheave that, the brutality and the cruelty to have that sort of state of mind is something else. And so it's really something when art is developed during times of war. And then it's unfortunate with the aspects of the Vietnam War that, that's one of those things that was a very misunderstood war, and it's unfortunate the way that it was handled and covered in press and so forth. But yeah, it's one of those things that, again, if you pay attention to history, you tend not to repeat it. But it's unfortunate. It's one of those ever-moving cycles. Sometimes the wheel just keeps on turning, But yeah, that's very prevalent to explain this and to make this a point that this was used. Surrealism was used to combat these terrors in society. Alright, so Surrealism was about more than works of art. So Surrealist imagery is probably the most recognizable element of the movement, though various visual arts, from exhibitions and journalists, of poetic, often harmonious poetry and prose, were also created to unite and exchange ideas. So Sigmund Freud's widely translated book, The Interpretation of Dreams, was a vital work for many artists. So the approaches to Surrealism, this is the inspiration, his book about the interpretation of dreams. So Freud, the aspects of importance of dreams and the unconscious was a valid extension of human emotion and desires, and his exposure and openness of the complex of ideas, which enhance the aspects of the basis of Surrealism. So last, there are lots of women in Surrealism. So a host of intrigue of women are associated with Surrealist movement, including Eva Solarski, Joyce Mansour, Cicely Prosas, Leora Carrington, and Susie Cesari, sorry for that, and Merit Oppenheim. These artists and writers both championed Surrealist ideas and pushed against them to create work in which they could explore and counterbalance traditional narratives about gender, sexuality, desire, and repression. So Joyce Mansour's Cries in 1953 is one example. So this is a excerpt from it, or a quote from it. It says, "May my desires be fulfilled on the fertile soil of your body without shame." And so it's one of those things. Okay, yeah, expressing that, but with the aspects of, again, of course there's problems with everything in society, especially when you go into the aspects of men and women. But again, take a seat back or take a look with the aspects of this narrative that women weren't as prevalent as they should be in society is not all that true. And then in the aspects of women being really blazing with their sexuality, that's one of those things that, again, this is from my point of view, to each his own, but from me personally, it's one of those things that's not very, that goes against the natural essence of femininity, or being a woman. A woman is more demurred, restrained, and and then to be with the expression with that, out verbose about your sexuality. That's one of those things where I know you're trying to express your freedom, but there's other more productive ways and more rational ways to do that, instead of just acting like an adolescent about your sexuality. So it's one of those things here. Alright, with all this said, I'd like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me, and I have the links provided for you, as I always do, to reach out to me in this episode. Alright, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely, definitely take care. Bye-bye for now.